let's see, from a housekeeping perspective, let's see, just so you know, there's a training document link that I will add right here into the comments area. This is all within like the private membership area of the Food Truck Empire community that you have access to. But this is just a direct link so that you can download this basically like written instructional guide that kind of covers everything that we're going to talk about this week. That way you have it available in front of you and you can download it too, just for your reference. But other than that, that's kind of the high level of what we're going to try to cover this week. It's a lot of stuff. So Anthony, I'm just going to turn it over to you to start out. Just like last week, if you have any questions, just plug it into the chat area. You know, we're going to cover questions like all of those at the end of it, and then hopefully clarify anything that you have. So Anthony, what is up? I'm going to make you the host here.
Not too much. Let's see. One thing I wanted to add to what Brett was saying was, I don't know if any of you noticed, but in the week 1 materials, we have a link to my original business plan for Switch It Up. So you guys can kind of like use that as like a template to kind of understand the things that you should be thinking about when filling in your business plan. Obviously, we're going to go through like each section from here on out for the rest of the course. We'll go through like a overview of it today. But my version of the business plan is a really good way to kind of see like what kind of detail you should be thinking about. The best advice ever given to me when I wrote my business plan was to make it real. You don't really want to write like hypothetical things in there because you're not really sure how that'll work out. And also because you haven't really done the research into like those hypotheticals. So you want to really figure out the real logistics of the business. So like where you're going to vend, what days you're going to vend, what times you're going to vend, events that you plan on doing, what your menu is going to look like. And then you can start to figure out like how much does all that stuff cost? What do you need to get the business going? How you're going to structure the business? Who's going to be in charge? How many employees you're going to have? You want these kinds of like real data, real information. So just again, keep it real. Like Brett was saying, the business plan is kind of broken up into 3 things. There's the operations plan, there's the marketing plan, and then there's the financial details. The financial details, you guys will ask like a billion questions, and we'll save all of that for, I think it's week 4 or so. So around halfway through the course, we talk about the financial details. The biggest question that I know that you all have is, how do you plan for months that aren't immediate? So how do you plan 6 months, a year, 2 years in advance? And the short answer is you don't. You kind of just guess. But again, we'll cover all of that later. We'll talk about examples on how you can guess and make a more educated guess. The marketing plan, it's not so much about how you're going to do your advertising. The way I think about the marketing plan is how do customers perceive your business? What's the way you're going to communicate your business? How are you going to, it's not just about advertising, but it's also about how you're portraying yourself. So stuff like, you know, the name of your business and any promotions that you plan on doing, social media. But then it's also about, you know, the pricing, how you're going to price your food, and not necessarily from I need to price it at $10 per plate so I can cover the food costs. It's more like, what kind of value are customers going to see at this price point? So you have to think about your business from a customer point of view. And that's kind of where the operations plan, which I'll talk more about in a second, and the marketing plan differ. Is like the operations plan is, what are the internals of your business from a business perspective? What do you need to get going in order to do this successfully? And the marketing plan is, how do customers view your business? And so you have to kind of think about the business from both perspectives. And in that case, you're going to use use both of those perspectives to sell it to somebody else. Because there's two real reasons why you'd want to write a business plan. The first is you need to get money. So you have to go pitch to somebody, and the business plan is like the gateway to that pitch. You give it to them, review it, they offer commentary, and then they approve or disapprove your plan. The second is you just want to have a really, really good idea of what it's going to take to run a business. So even if you have like, $100,000 self-raised, you don't need any money. You still want to put together a business plan so that you can kind of get a feel for how this business is actually going to run, which is why earlier I said you want to keep it real, because you would only do yourself a disservice if you just throw a whole bunch of stuff in there that maybe you can do, maybe you won't do, but you'll cross that bridge when it comes. It's much easier to make decisions on the fly, which you'll definitely have to do at some point in time if you have a good idea for what kinds of obstacles you could potentially face. So going into the operations plan, which this week is really all about. And the materials that Brett shared goes like crazy in depth into all of this stuff, except for some things which you're going to have to do a little bit of research on yourself. First, there's like the legal form of your business. Do you want it to be like an LLC or an S Corp? And those are real. I'm not an accountant, so I can't answer what works best for you, but those are really tax designations. You'll also want to think about how your management structure is going to be. Are you going to be a partner with somebody? Are you going to be the sole owner? Do you want to have any employees? And really think about, if you're going to have employees, what's your hiring timeline going to be? Are you going to hire 3 people right in the beginning? Are you going to hire 1 person right now and every 6 months hire somebody new to grow your employee base as your business grows? You might also want to include a section that talks about external but invested parties. And I don't mean invested financially, or even financial investors, but also maybe people who are advisors or consultants to your business. You'll see in my business plan, if you look at it, that I had a special advisory board. And actually, it's kind of funny. Every time I've shown that to somebody and they've shown me their business plan, they also put a special advisory board in there. So it may be something that you really want to consider. The people on my advisory board were people who were in New Mexico small business associations. I had a nutritionist on the board to make sure that everything met, current trends in nutrition. And then there was a marketing guru on there as well. And actually, later on, that advisory board changed a little bit because as I met more people at special skills, they then became kind of like ad hoc advisors. And then again, maybe add some consultants if you have those people that you're paying, people that you're not paying, and how you're gonna work that out. And you really just want to use this to kind of outline. Any investors have a really clear picture of how this business is going to work. Beyond that, there's the operational structure of the business. And this is where you really identify what your day-to-day operations are going to look like. I talked earlier about the financials and trying to figure out what's going to happen 6 months, a year down the line. Really, the first, what you're going to do immediately is probably the most important thing to identify. So where you're going to vend right in the beginning and what your plan is. Are you going to keep a schedule throughout your first year or first 6 months? What hours you're going to run. I remember in my business plan, we were planning on vending 3 times a day, 4 days a week, and then 2 times a day for the other 3 days a week. 2 days a week, and then with 1 day off. It turned out that was extremely hard to be able to do with the food concept that we had. So we had to change that later. But we had a plan in action to see how effective that would be. And we started doing it that way. So that was kind of an example of being able to plan this out and then be able to change on the fly. So yeah, you really want to put in your day-to-day operations, your hours. Don't forget to include stuff like when you're going to do prep time, when you're going to drive to the commissary kitchen, and how that kind of dynamic is going to work as well. You also want to identify identify like business procedures. So if you're doing kitchen prep, the kinds of recipes that you need to do when you're going to go shopping, when you're going to pick up food, when you're going to drop off food, when you're going to do catering, how catering is going to work. You really want to identify like everything that you could possibly want to do in your business from an operational standpoint. And this is kind of stuff that almost nobody will care about except for you, maybe an investor or any partners that you want to bring in there. But it's really good to really hammer down these kind of goals right now. And then at the very least, you'll want to start thinking about expected revenue streams and company milestones. And so for these two, you don't really need to have a real clear picture of what you want. Especially, so let's talk about like expected revenue streams. Last week I mentioned, obviously there's like your day-to-day service and then catering. Maybe you have like some kind of packaged food processing that you want to do. So you can at least think about, okay, these are places that I want to bring money in from. How can I make that stuff work? So you want to kind of lay out a timeline for these things and maybe an operation plan for each one of them. And then identifying your company milestones is really more a thing for investors, but at the same time, it gives you kind of like a long-term vision. You don't want to just say that you're going to do this 9 to 5 thing every single day of the week for the next 5 years. Maybe that is what you want to do, but at the same time, maybe you have some long-term goals. Maybe you say, in 2 years, I want to be able to get a second truck. Here's the things that we need to have in place to make that happen. In 5 years, maybe we decide to franchise. So here's the things that we need to have in place to make that happen. So, and that you'll see in my business plan, I think is literally a paragraph. So you don't have to go like hardcore into detail unless you really want to. If it helps you, then go for it. If it doesn't really help you, then it's okay to just kind of like keep it brief. We also talk about, this is kind of the last thing that I'll mention before we go into the QA, but I talk a lot about your food philosophy, and really like everything that you're going to do in your truck kind of revolves around this core concept. And you can even identify like the way that you handle your financials later will revolve around, what you plan on serving in the kitchen, what your like core concept is. And by food philosophy, there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just about serving tacos. If you have like a taco with a twist, for instance, where are you going to get your ingredients? If you're going for like locally sourced ingredients or even like organic ingredients, that becomes part of your food philosophy. It shows that you really care about the product that you're putting out there. And so that will, you'll start here in your operations plan, because you'll talk about these are the places that I'm getting my food from because this is what we really care about. And then in your marketing plan, it becomes like, not necessarily a gimmick, but a way to have customers identify you as this is your unique bringing to the market. So again, if I'm doing organic tacos with locally sourced ingredients, in my operations plan, I'll say I'm bringing, I'm going to this farm on this day and I'm going to this farm on this day to get these ingredients. But from a customer perspective in the marketing plan later, it'll be, we're doing everything locally sourced, everything is fresh, and we actually work with the farmers. So those will be things that you're sharing with your customers that'll help make you a more unique and more personable business in your town.
So Anthony, I just want to unpack like a few things that you said. Like obviously the kind of all the information is like textbook style in there, but I just kind of want to get like your specific, like what's happened with you in real life. Cause I think that'll help with everybody like putting together their business plans. The revenue stream portion, like what are your main revenue streams that have worked for you? And then on the flip side with that too, like what are some streams of income that you were like thinking initially were going to be big deals for you, but that just didn't pan out, for whatever reason, whether it's because, you're in Albuquerque or whatever.
Yeah, originally we wanted to go really hard with like packaged nut butters and jams. So that was like a big influence in the business plan that we originally put out there. It turned out that we didn't have the capital needed right in the beginning. So we kind of slowly worked it in over time. So like our first year going, we started doing all of these farmers markets. And once we got established in the farmers markets, once people understood who we were, we started producing homemade bread to sell at the farmers markets. And we started packaging our just different nut butters every week, different nut butters and different jellies and jams. And so then we started slowly building like kind of an awareness about that. And hopefully we can get to the point where we can put those into stores. But there's like a lot of work ahead of us, and we still need to raise a lot of capital. So at this point, it's kind of like building the client base to present to banks and investors to show that we have a history of doing this. We just need some large investment right now to be able to get it done. I think we banked more on day-to-day service, especially within like our first 2 years. And that is a large portion of our revenue. But at this point, we're getting like a lot of requests for catering. And so I can see like a very, very soon switching between like day-to-day service and catering. And my brother, actually, he's always wanted to do like pop-up dinners as like a thing. And now he's starting to get to the point with like his culinary awareness, at least customers who recognize him as a talented chef, that we could kind of like, instead of doing like a day service, we could host like a monthly private dinner for a huge group, like at least 50 to 100 people, where we charge probably like, we've talked about like $75 to $100 a plate. I mean, per seat, because it'd be like a 7-course thing. So those are kinds of things that we were thinking about in the beginning and where we've had to change direction towards, at least now. I remember one thing because we were thinking about doing a lot of day-to-day service type stuff, we had planned on getting like a second truck by our 3rd year. And actually at this point, I don't think I want a second truck unless like we switched to like just doing like desserts or something like that. I think that would be more feasible. But the things that we do in the kitchen they're not easy to translate to like another chef, essentially, because at this point we have no plan. And I don't mean that like we don't have a business plan. I mean that like our menu schedule is just like, essentially my brother will just decide what he wants to do for the week, and then he comes up with like a menu plan for that day, and he's always changing the menu. So that's kind of become our concept now. It's just like not just switch it up because it's sandwiches, but also switch up the menu like on a weekly, sometimes daily basis, which definitely does not translate well to having like other trucks.
Let's see. Also too, within like the food philosophy / mission statement section, that can seem like a really big question. Like what, I guess, just to bring it down to like reality, like what is your mission statement? What mission statement did you have? Like, is it helping you make decisions in your business on like a day-to-day basis, or is it kind of like something you've just put down and like forgotten about?
No, actually, like the core mission statement that we kind of identified still permeates like everything we do today. And you might all think about like a mission statement as something that a nonprofit writes up and puts forward. And it's actually not too different from that. It's essentially like you identifying what makes you passionate about what you're going to do on your truck, and then kind of just rewriting that so that somebody would be interested by that. And essentially like keeping it short. So our original business plan mission statement was like delivering like gourmet scratch-made nut butters in a way that allowed basically like to feed the masses regardless of dietary need. So we had like the whole concept was like something for everyone. And so we kind of shifted from like nut butters and jellies, because on the truck itself, like on a daily service or even at a catering event, that's not what customers want. but we can still do those things. So we have station on the truck so that if anyone has a dietary need, they can request something special and we'll make it right then and there from scratch. Everything else on the truck is made from scratch anyways. And part of it became like, you never know what you're going to get, but it'll always be awesome. And so like, we basically identified really early, like what our core values were going to be. And those stuck with us to this day.
Very cool. Okay, so related to the question about generating revenue and like what events, Christoph is wondering, in your business plan, how were you able to determine before you started how many events and which ones you would be able to do each week or month?
In the beginning, we only knew of very specific events. And it turns out that they were like the big ones that like everybody would want to do. So you'll definitely want to like just think about your local community calendar and think about like major events that you've been at. And then kind of pick out those ones. So for instance, like you might have heard me last week talk about the Balloon Fiesta. That was actually a plan, but it turns out that that's an event that's like really political and hard to get into. So we kind of had to like let that go early. But we were able to identify events that were almost as big that we can get into that had a much lower barrier of entry. So we identified like Freedom Fourth as an event that it might be kind of a high cost. It costs like $1,000 for us to get into that event. But we were going to be serving an audience of like 20,000 people. So it was kind of like a risk reward type situation. So we identified like that early. There's a 4 Summerfest that happened in Albuquerque, and we kind of identified going to 2 of those early. One was like smaller, so that would be like a test for the larger one that happens like a month later. And so we identified that in the business plan 2 years early. And then we kind of just like made up the rest. Not made up like we just made up events that would happen, but we kind of like looked at like a calendar that we knew had, you know, events going on. And then we were just like, okay, we'll plan on these ones, assume that it costs this much money to get into, assume that there's this many people. For some of them, we could actually do the research. For instance, like our debut event was the Chocolate and Coffee Fest. So we got in touch with the event coordinator for that very early on, and he laid out like what it takes to get into the event, and we were able to kind of quickly say, okay, this is something that we could reasonably reach in our first year. It turned out that that was like our first event. So, and every event has an event coordinator, whether it's run by the city or a private organization. These people are usually very, I would say not very easy, but definitely easy to get a hold to versus like showing up at a business and hoping to find the coordinator for food trucks for that thing. So it's kind of easy to find out, to get a hold of somebody who runs these major events and then identify what the costs are and what you'll need to make sure of in order to participate in these events. And in our first year, we didn't say we were going to do an event like every week. I think we planned on doing one a month throughout like the summer. And we kind of said that the summer was going to be our event season and that the winter was going to be kind of like our catering season. So we basically said like one event a month in the summer for the first year, one catering thing in the winter for the first year. And then we just assumed growth over time. And again, we'll talk a lot about these kinds of details in the financial week, but that's a really good question.
This one's from Brandon and Carrie, and in relation to like how you were planning to generate revenue initially, do you need additional licenses to sell packaged product out of your truck at the farmer's market, or is it covered under the licenses you already need for your food truck?
That's an excellent question. And the quick answer is that you'll need to speak with like your health inspector about that. And I can't remember if I talk about, no, that's not this week. Next week we talk about like permits and stuff. But the best advice that I'll give you next week is to like become friends with all the people who give you permits. Have like a really positive working relationship with these people. And essentially they give you like a lot of really good information information if you have like a really professional and positive relationship. So going back to like the farmers market thing, like jellies, for instance, and salsas, you think of like barbecue sauces, salsas, and jellies. There's like a lot of regulations around those things because they have like a really long shelf life. And so you're going to have to find out like how your state handles these kinds of permits. And they're all kind of different, although salsas and jellies are actually kind of similar. There has to be like an acidity level that they have to be at. So you're gonna have to like get them tested, and then you can get permitted, and the permitting process costs money. These are things to think about. But when it came to like doing nut butters, the health inspector actually wasn't really sure how to handle it. He's like, it is kind of a long shelf life, but it also like doesn't have to be. So the way he explained it to us, and this is why I say have like a good relationship with them, is because he wouldn't have told me this information if we didn't have a good relationship with him, if he didn't like trust the way we did business and the way we took care of the food on the truck. But essentially he told us that if we package it in such a way that it's not a long shelf life, because normal food that you sell would have like a refrigeration life of 7 days. That's like the standard. So you could basically like make your nut butters, package it in a plastic container, and then, you know, just say like consume within 7 days on the label, and that'll meet like the minimum health requirements for the city of Albuquerque. And so we kind of were able to like go ahead with that as a way to avoid having to figure out how to like jar it and can it and then put it in a grocery store, because we weren't going to go that route at that point in time. So there will be different licenses that you come across, and even vending at farmers markets, you might be required to have certain licenses. We had to like apply for like a grower's license, but because we were selling food that was prepared, it was like easier than the grower's license. So it's kind of like this weird marriage between like the city health department and the state health department, and rules that they required from growers versus rules that they required from food vendors like myself.
Another thing that I think that we need to talk about a little bit more in depth Anthony, is one of the big things is going to be like pricing, and what should you price your menu, and how should you put together your menu? What should your costs be? That sort of thing. And I know this is put together within the documentation, but I just think it'd be good for you to talk about that a little bit too, and just talk about like how do you go about putting your menu pricing together, and like, you know, how much is like an acceptable food cost for you? How much do you kind of commit to operations expenses? Like, how do you kind of like budget all of that? Like, because I know you got a pretty simple framework for all of that.
Yeah. So the smartest thing to do is to like literally list out every one of your month's expenses, and that includes like your food cost. And then you essentially want to be able to like turn a profit. So your menu price is going to reflect all of those embedded prices plus a little bit of profit. That kind of sounds like easier said than done. But the way that so when we were starting to write the business plan and starting to do the food costing and all of that, a bunch of chefs and restaurant owners that we had talked to suggested like a good rule of thumb is that your food cost should be 33% of your menu price. So for instance, if your menu price for like, let's say you made a sandwich, your price is $9 on the menu. That means it costs $3 for all the ingredients. When we started food costing everything, a lot of our stuff actually turned out to be a little cheaper than that. So a lot of our menu items were in the 20 to 25% range. And for, you know, once you start thinking about like events that charge you fees, they're always going to try and take at least 10% off the top. So I definitely recommend trying to get your food costs to be within 25% of the menu price. And that actually gives you plenty of room for all your overhead and a little extra room for profit and potential issues that you can't foresee.
I know this is a tough one to answer, but what can you, like, from a sales standpoint, obviously, like, the demand of your product is going to change from time to time, but like, just based on your experience, what's like a good kind of average that people can use just based on your experience to expect how much like sales volume they can anticipate when they go out in a truck? Like, what's a good safe estimate that people can like use in their numbers?
Yeah. So when we started doing our business plan, we were estimating like 100 sales per day. And then I revised it and estimated like 50 sales per day for each, and not every day of the week. I mean, 50 sales per like vending day. And that still demonstrated a lot of profit for the month, which expanded to the year. What you want to do, and this is why I talked about listing out all of your expenses, because when we go through the financial stuff, you can kind of identify what your break-even cost is. And you don't actually ever want to aim to break even, but it kind of gives you like a gauge. Okay, I need to be able to sell like 20 menu items a day in order to break even. Our expenses were actually on the low end of like what I've heard from other food trucks. So our break even was kind of around like $200 to $250 each vending day. Like if we didn't meet that in sales, we actually had a really bad day. So, and Albuquerque is kind of a strange beast. So if you're like in a huge city like New York, where your audience is like hundreds of thousands of people, you probably should be targeting like a minimum of like 100 sales each vending day to cover all of your costs, because all of the costs are inflated in big cities anyway. Albuquerque, like a really good day was $500 in sales. And so like big event weekends, not like huge events, but I mean like if we had like 2 events in a row on Saturday and Sunday, or Friday and Saturday, if we covered like more than $1,000 in that weekend, like that would essentially cover our cost for the month. So the whole rest of the month in sales was like profit for us. And big events, you know, if you are expecting to do, you should, like at a huge event, you should at least expect to do like $2,000 to $3,000 in sales. And that kind of, at least on our truck, that was kind of close to the maximum that we could fit in storage on the truck. So that's kind of like a gauge. Bigger trucks have, obviously, there's more room to put stuff in. And then if you go with like a different menu plan, so like, I think last week I talked about doing an event where we planned on only 3 menu items. So if you went to 2 menu items or even 1 menu item, you could fit more stuff in the truck, because then you don't have to worry about so many different variables. So then you can, because you're putting more stuff in the truck, you can have more sales, and then your max reach should be more.
This is a sidebar question. Jennifer, jumping ahead, asks, quite ahead, after we finish our business plan, will Anthony or Brett be reviewing our finished plan? Yes, Jennifer. I don't think we actually talked about this much during the first class, but yeah, that's a big part of this, is to not just go through like the process of like building a business plan, but actually like submitting it at the end of this 8 weeks. And then what we want to do is have like the last class basically be like reviewing, and like obviously we're going to send you feedback too, because having Anthony have a chance to like take a look, especially, and take a look at like your business plan, and he's going to be able to like identify pretty easily or pretty quickly in some scenarios where it's like, oh, you have too many menu items, right? Like it's going to be hard to execute and create like 20 different things on your food truck, or like, oh, maybe you should look into some more different places to vend besides those two that you think are going to be great spots, because they might not end up being great spots. So that's really like a huge part of this, is not just going through like the process of building it for yourself, but also like having the opportunity to have it like submitted to somebody that owns a food truck, that operates a food truck, to take a look at it and just kind of give their honest feedback on like what they think about it. With that being said, though, I would like in the past, like people have sent through not 100% completed business plans, and that's totally fine. And some people have actually just done like instead like pitch decks with like a few PowerPoint slides that do, just kind of address some of the main questions, and that's totally fine. Like if you need like funding and like things like that, like Anthony mentioned, yes, you're going to need to put together like a really formal and like tight business plan. So you're going to want to like pay attention to more of the details. But if you're like just doing this for yourself, it doesn't need to be like in a perfect format. So yes, good question, Jennifer, and thanks for bringing that up. Okay, so I think we've. I guess. Do you what on the topic of like pricing and menus? Like, how big of a menu? Because I know I brought this up. Do you think is like too big? Like, what is like the maximum amount of menu items that you would start out with initially, just based on your experience?
It really depends on like the type of food you're selling. So I'll tell you a story. Food trucks in Albuquerque, there's like really two kinds. There's like taco trucks. Okay, there's three kinds. There's taco trucks, there's barbecue trucks, and then there's New Mexican trucks. And New Mexican trucks, they're kind of like a hodgepodge of everything. So they'll sell like burgers, tacos, enchilada plates, nachos, like a whole bunch of stuff. And a lot of it's unrelated. And I see these trucks all the time, and they'll have like 12, 15 menu items. And it's literally insane because everything is so different on their menu that it's really hard to like keep a lot of that stuck in stock. So maybe they have like a lot of like their big sellers, and they've identified like 3 things, and then they have like a little bit of the rest. Maybe they make like 1 to 5 total of the rest of those kinds of things. If you're doing something like a taco truck or even a sandwich truck, I use those as 2 examples. You can have a larger menu because there's a lot of menu overlap. And so when I say menu overlap, you think of like a taco truck, right? All of the garnishes for like every taco is going to be the same. The taco shell is going to be the same on everything. So you just need to have a lot of those things. And then your filler, you can have a lot of variety because you're not going to be putting that much in each taco. So like maybe like if you did a 3 taco plate, maybe the total weight of like the food inside the tacos is like 1/3 of a pound total. And then with your garnishes and your taco shell, it adds up to like a lot more stuff, at least in appearance. So you have like a lot of overlap between menu items, but like the core of each menu item, now you can expand to like 10, 15 things if you wanted to. I definitely, when you're doing like locally sourced ingredients and you're trying to make it like a really gourmet feel, you really want to stick like to like 5, 6 at most, maybe 7 if you're really feeling it. But like once you start doing events where it's going to be busy, you have to really think about like how much time is it going to take to prepare each of these menu items. And if there's very little overlap between the menu items, the time it takes to get that stuff done is going to start increasing with more people. So if you have like, 3 people outside your truck, you could probably get that stuff out the window in 5 to 10 minutes. But now if there's a line of like 10, 15 people, the ticket time is going to be on the order of like 20, 30, 40 minutes. And especially if you don't have a lot of menu overlap, you can't kind of like conveyor belt this thing and get it out the window. And that's one thing that like I've seen a lot of trucks in Albuquerque just like never put it together in their head. Like we need to just have a process where we can make all of the things kind of a similar ticket time and get it out the window quickly. And like another good example is like pizza trucks. They have like the same base ingredients, and then you're just kind of putting toppings on. And that's really where like the difference in menu items comes from. So you can kind of like know what to expect in terms of ticket times and pricing and all of that. So if you're just starting and you don't really know what you're doing, then you can kind of just like pick a simple concept, figure out how you're going to innovate that, and then keep everything simple. Because one, it looks more elegant from a customer perspective if everything is simple, but two, it also makes it easier on the operational side for you to plan and put it into action.
See, another good thing that I just wanted to touch on, one more thing too, just to make sure that we address is you recommend researching other food trucks in your area when putting together your plan. So taking a look at like their menu prices, their menu items, the locations that they're vending. How did you go about doing that? Just Google searches, looking on like Facebook? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I had a really proprietary process for identifying other food trucks, and it was, I basically like was driving around and would see them and then park and go up and talk to them and find out, like, I'd look at their menu, and then a lot of trucks in Albuquerque are actually like pretty friendly owners. And I think, at least from stories that I've heard from people in the class and other food truck owners around the world, country, that a lot of food truck owners are kind of similar. You will run into people who are just like not open. But that was basically my strategy, was like, if I ever saw a new food truck, I'd just like stop, look at their menu, buy something from them, and then just talk to them about their business when they had like 5 minutes of open time. And then I'd try and schedule a time in the future that we could like sit down and maybe have a longer conversation. And that was really how I got a lot of information about like what trucks there were in Albuquerque and what they were doing. And then I started following all of them on Facebook and Twitter, and I started kind of like mapping where they were going. So I could see that like a lot of trucks were going to the same places. So I figured that was like, those were good fishing spots essentially. And then I noticed, I know of other high volume areas in town. So I'd like go there and find out if they have a customer need, like if they have a lot of people who need to eat and they have to go like really far to go get food, or, these people are just less willing to drive and they would love to have a food truck. So there's like kind of like figuring out based on what all the trucks are doing, where to go, and then identifying like gaps in the market and capitalizing on those gaps.
So once you found, so you went on social media after you found some of these food trucks, you saw where a lot of these folks were vending. Like once you found like a spot that would seem like it was a good vending location, like what did you do next to like get in contact with the person that like owned the vending location, or like how did you go about finding out who that person was, and like what was your approach to like reaching out to people at that point?
Yeah, so for instance, every Wednesday, Albuquerque has like this food truck pod at like a market. It's like a big parking lot, and there's like stores on both sides of the parking lot, and there's just a big empty space in the middle. So every Wednesday, food trucks park in that big empty space. And so I'll use this as an example. In order to find out how to get into that space, I talked to a couple of the food trucks who would park there on Wednesdays, and they would essentially, like, every time I talked to them, I'd learn a little bit more information about it, and eventually I could piece together, okay, I need to find this person and talk to that person. And then you kind of like essentially come across, not necessarily a paper trail, but a trail of breadcrumbs that help you identify like who's the person that you need to talk to. And it usually happens much faster than the way I'm describing it sounds, but you'd be surprised at how like little like online evidence there is for this sort of thing. So you actually have to like get out and talk to people, and which for me personally was like a huge deal, because I was like, everything can be done online. I don't ever need to talk to anybody ever again.
So Natasha has a good question here. Is there a different process in building the plan if you're not selling food? Are there the fees and permits pretty much the same? So she sells, not food, but drinks. We'll just say like a smoothie truck or something like that. Maybe I add some packaged items for profit or purpose. Oh, coffee. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so if you're selling coffee, you pretty much have to go through the same permitting process. And this will depend like city to city. Maybe there's some cities that just have different rules about this sort of stuff. I would expect bigger cities to have like a different set of rules because they have to be like much more strict about like made to order type stuff. Or so if you're selling like bottled water and like sodas that are all packaged and then like pre-made deli sandwiches that you could just keep wrapped in the fridge, that's like a different ball game. But the permitting process, especially when it comes to food, usually is pretty similar. So really the only way to know is to like talk to the cities. In Albuquerque they call it the Department of Environmental Health, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but that's just what they call it here. So you talk to like the administrators at the department, and then you can even get a hold of like a health inspector and talk to them about those kinds of regulations. So stuff like coffee and like real food that's made to order. Sorry, not real food, but food that's made to order. Those things will probably be the most strict sort of stuff to go through for permitting, because they'll like want to make sure that you're checking temperatures and that you have to have like a certain hand washing station. Otherwise, if you're just like handing out like concessions kind of stuff, the permitting process is probably the same, but it's probably easier to go through because they don't have to like check temperatures. They don't have to make sure that like that your cooking area is a certain way, that you don't have to have like a hood vent. So the requirements will probably be easier, but the permitting process will be similar. And the fees, I would assume, are actually nearly identical because the city needs to get their money somehow.
Would you recommend adding on like any other items aside from just coffee, I assume?
You mean like in terms of like what you're selling?
Yeah, like on a coffee truck. I assume some type of pastry or something like that.
Yeah, so usually, like at least from what I've seen, usually coffee trucks will kind of have a limited menu. It'll be like there's like all their lattes and espresso based drinks, and then they're just like coffee cups, and maybe they'll have like a pastry or two. Coffee shops usually have like the space to do much more. So like this is like a great place where you could actually partner with another truck. For instance, if you're doing coffee, you could just kind of like offer to sell another truck's pastries or baked goods or sandwiches or breakfast sandwiches, whatever you want. And so then you like buy it from them at like not cost, but maybe a discounted rate. So they're just pre-selling you like a whole bunch ahead of time, and then you're marking it up. So both organizations are winning essentially from both each other's perspective. But coffee is like a really profitable item. I think like the cost per cup is somewhere in the realm of like 50 cents. It's like 10 cents to 50 cents per cup. And then you're charging at least like $4 a cup. And if you're in Hawaii, you're charging like $8 a cup. So there's a lot of markup there.
So Candace asks, do you recommend joining your local food truck association at a cost to you prior to getting started? For example, Philly has Philly Mobile Food Association and they charge $250 for prospective members. However, I couldn't figure out the benefit of signing up as a prospect member, which is an option they offer. Do you think it's worth to join to just be able to network with current food truck owners?
There is a benefit in joining a food truck association. If it's like $250 a year, that's not terrible, because usually, at least like the ones that I've identified, usually they'll have like a lot of like info sharing, and it's not necessarily like just regarding like new regulations or like things that are happening around the community, but it's also like people can identify these as like, okay, I have an event, I'm putting on a wedding, so let's contact the food truck association to find out if they recommend any trucks. So a lot of these organizations will just take these kinds of solicitations and either like pinpoint trucks that they think will fit what the customer is asking for, or they'll just like blast everybody and it'll be a free-for-all. So, you know, if this kind of if the Philly Association, for instance, is doing that sort of thing, then your return on investment should be pretty good, not immediate. So you really have to like ask them straight up, like, what could I gain from joining your association? Why would I pay $250 if I'm not going to be making any money off of it? I know, like in Albuquerque, all of the food truck associations are free, but we have had discussions of creating a membership and charging like a low membership fee for the sole purpose of being able to lobby with our state legislator, because Albuquerque is like a ridiculously like corrupt political city, and such that, you know, they're making laws to try and like favor one business association over another instead of like this like commercial enterprise model. So we've talked about that in the past. There's been no decision with me, but these are the kinds of conversations that you could essentially think of having with any food truck association in your local area.
Anthony, I think you should talk about too, like the benefits that you've gotten from being part of that food truck organization group that you're in. And I know it's not necessarily like an official association, quote unquote.
Right. Yeah. So the biggest benefit is like, because they've been around for a while, like almost everybody who wants catering done but doesn't know like really who the good trucks are will just send an email to this organization, and the guy who moderates it just sends out emails to everybody who's a part of it, all the food trucks. The reason why it works out so well is because like he does his vending during the week and he doesn't really want to work on the weekends, and all the events are always on the weekends, so he's kind of just like, here, you all have at it. And eventually, like once you make a name for yourself in the community, these catering solicitations will come to you directly. And so like at this point, like I get an email from the food truck, we call it the Albuquerque Food Truck Co-op. I get an email from them like at least once a day, if not every other day at the minimum. And then I'll get a catering solicitation for an event once or twice a week. So like at this point, we can basically pick and choose what event we want to do. Whereas in the beginning, like we were relying on like all of this kind of information, where openings up were for the night. And that's another benefit actually, is because all the food trucks were part of that. We could send emails to all the other food trucks like, hey, we're not able to be at this location tonight. Does somebody want to cover our shift? And so that's kind of one of the other benefits, is that it allows for more of a food truck community. You can like put out calls for food trucks to cover your shift, or you can put out a call to like fill somebody else's shift and essentially continue to like build on your reputation.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that too, I mean, I would say like, you know, owning a food truck, it's just like any other type of business, right? Like, so if you're part of the food truck association, and especially if you take time to kind of like get to know the local people there and kind of become buddies with them, like they're going to know about all the other events. If there's like, you know, say like a certain food truck cancels, you know, and people know that you're cool, they'll probably just say, hey, you know, check out, you know, Candace's truck, you know what I mean? For example, because she's really cool and she's always on time and she serves great food. Like you're just going to get more business that way. So I would definitely say that is a worthwhile group to be part of for sure. That way you're in the know and not on the outside. That's for sure. And Stacia says too, in Denver, the Food Truck Association has all the good leads in the spots downtown. So it's really great advertising. And definitely agree. And if you can too, I would say if you can somehow, if you don't have one in your area and you can be like the person that puts together an association, that can be a really good way to kind of generate some more leads and generate a lot more business that way too.
Yeah, absolutely. In a lot of cities where there are food truck associations, they're so entrenched that it's just like Stacia's situation in Denver. Like they get all the good leads, they get all the good spots. So you really actually like need to be part of it. So if you can like build your own essentially where there is none, that could be you in like a year or two.
So Anthony, just based on like kind of the information from this week, like what would you recommend, what sections of the business plan would you recommend having done this week, or at least getting started on?
Yeah, last week I mentioned this and I said to kind of just think about it. But this week you really want to like identify like what, if you haven't already, you really want to identify what your food concept is going to be. Because like I said earlier, everything that happens from here on out flows from this one like core idea. So like I said, if you're doing like locally sourced ingredients as your food concept in sandwiches, then you're going to be able to figure out what the costs are, where you're going to get your ingredients from, you know, what your kitchen strategy is going to be, when your prep times are going to be, how many people you need to have in the kitchen with certain skills, and then identify like what the perceived value is to the local community, what your customers are going to get out of it, and then obviously like figure out the pricing for everything. So like that is like a really, really important part of the business plan. And you know, we talked about like you don't have to have the business plan complete by the end. This is kind of like that. It's kind of an evolving thing. The more you know about your business, the more this idea will kind of like take shape. But having a really decent idea of it now is like really important. And then from there, you want to start thinking about, okay, what's my legal form of business? Am I going to do like an LLC versus an S Corp? That's kind of an easy thing to research online. It should take you like maybe 2 hours to like read about it, think about it, and then kind of pick your poison. And then figuring out some stuff that you may already know right now is like, am I doing this alone or am I going to do this with a partner? So that you can start to like write down these real details right now, and then kind of just keep thinking about the operations. So first things first is like identify like your core business mission, your core, you know, food philosophy, and then start thinking about details that you already know about, and then just slowly filling in the gaps. And this whole business plan doesn't come together overnight. It doesn't come together in a week. I worked on mine for the business plan competition like every day for a month. Some people take, you know, they do it very slowly. Maybe they spend like 5 hours a week, and they take like 3 months to do it, which is perfectly fine. As long as you're constantly thinking about and doing research towards identifying the things that need to go in there, you'll do this at your pace.
Christoph has a good question. I'm assuming food truck associations are run by food truck owners, so they may not welcome a newcomer that will compete with existing members. What do you think?
If you ever run into a food truck association that does that, that's like a great way to create your own, because a lot of food trucks in the community are like excluded from that. And so you could essentially, I would imagine you could build a rival organization pretty quickly by being more transparent and communicative. Luckily, like the Albuquerque one was really open anyway, and like the I would say like the core food trucks being like the people who like joined early were all that way, and those were the people who I went to for advice. And so like what good is a food truck association if you can't go to them for advice, even if it's like not about events, even if it's like how do I get through the permitting process? So if they're not willing to give you that level of detail, then they're not really good as a business association in the first place.
Good point. I know some of the food truck associations, like I know there's one in Atlanta, for example, that's owned by a food truck builder. And that's to kind of, you know, get people in through the association, and then hopefully, you know, you buy your truck from them too. So just kind of keep in mind about that one too. Okay. Stacia says part of the Denver Food Truck Association requires that you're accepting to everyone and you're not competing, kind of working together. So that sounds like a good one for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I want to just make sure that all these questions have been addressed here. I know there's one that we missed. This is kind of an unrelated kind of sidebar question, so I left it for a little bit later. Jane asks, those who have bought a food truck, how do you decide on the type? So like a Workhorse, P30, the size of the food truck, etc.
I know for me, I didn't really care about the manufacturer. I did a little bit of research on like the company types, but I didn't really find too much difference. I really just wanted a truck that like was relatively easy to drive and maintain. So I was just looking for something that was like automatic and that was common, so that I could find mechanics who could work on it without having to like have specialized parts or specialized training and that sort of thing. So especially like if you're in a city that doesn't really have a lot of food trucks, you might also want to go that route, because finding people who are like specialized to work on these things might be a challenge. But
I would also say, yeah, I would also say too, on top of that, is that just think about like, not necessarily like this type of food truck, like the model that you need right now, but more just think about like the menu first, because whatever you're planning to serve, that's going to kind of dictate like what you need. So if you're doing coffee, you might be able to do that off of like just a Chevy or like a Ford Transit, which isn't even a truck. It's more, it's just a van. You don't need that much space. But if you're going to be cooking pizza, you're probably going to need a truck. You're going to need something larger. It depends how much space you want to work with. So I would definitely work, just kind of follow this process, start working on like the menu that you're working on first. And then a lot of those questions of like, oh, what do I need? You can figure out that like as a next step.
Yeah, way later.
One other thing too that I want to make sure to cover from the content that's within the community, and just so you guys know too, there's like more formal, like I guess specific like classroom training is within like the Food Truck Academy members area. So there's like videos in there, and then the text, like the more textbook content is in there too that I put a link up to. But one other thing too from that I want to make sure you talk about before we get off here, Anthony, is what partnerships like did you leverage early on, like outside of like a food truck association to get started? So like what type of businesses did you like try to build relationships or start building relationships to like help you generate revenue and basically get more places to vend at?
Yeah, so going off like the very first thing I said, which was to try and make your business plan more real, I went into the business plan competition knowing that like I wanted to have like real information for the judges, because they were ultimately like the investors. And this is kind of like the same approach that you would have with any investor, is you want to have like real information for them. So when they ask you like about the nuts and bolts, you have like a real answer instead of like well, I think it'll be like this. But essentially like first things that we started to identify, so like we were like, all right, we're going to do peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Let's figure out where we can get these ingredients from in order to make our sandwiches. So we started identifying like bakeries that made bread. How much could we get the bread? Like what's the cheapest they'll sell us the bread for? Stores that we can get like ingredients like apples and nuts and stuff like that. And what's the cheapest that we can get that stuff for? And so it's a lot of like, especially in the very beginning, it was a lot of like bargain hunting essentially. And that actually isn't a bad way to begin when you're talking about this, because this is all information that you'll start to put into your operations plan. And at the same time, it'll help you identify quickly whether like the menu itself is feasible or not. So you like, if you're doing barbecue and you're like, okay, what's the cheapest I can get a slab of ribs for? And like the only place that you can get it is selling it at like $15 a pound. Then you're like, well, all right, I guess I'm not going to be able to do ribs because that's just way too high a cost. So you really kind of want to be able to like identify quickly whether you can or cannot execute your own menu. Brett, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Christoph, there's a question about where to find Anthony's business plan. You can find that in the week one portion in the Food Truck Academy members area. You can just download the whole thing right there. And Stacy actually has a really good point too, that you can just, before you buy any food truck, you can just pay a mechanic to look at it. That's a really, really good idea. Sounds like in her instance, the mechanic said to just walk away from that deal. So that's, yeah, definitely a good idea, especially if you got a buddy or somebody that can come along with you, or you can pay some guy, $100 to take a look at it and give you your opinion. That can definitely save you a lot of money.
Yeah, I had a similar story. It was the same situation. I was close to buying a truck, and we took it to a mechanic to evaluate. And he actually, is kind of funny. He spoke with both of us, and he was like, "I don't even know why you bought this truck in the first place. Like, everything about it is just like a nightmare, and you're in for like a real big liability very, very soon." So he told me to walk away, and he was like, "You need to either unload this thing or trash it, because you're in for a lot of costs very soon."
Okay. So I know we're a bit over an hour, getting at about an hour 10, but Anthony, what would you recommend that folks take a look at before the next class, have done before the next class, and look through so that they're prepared for next week?
There is a lot of information in like the textbooky portion of the materials for this week. It's like 15 pages, and they're like full-size pages. So if you only have like a limited amount of time this week, definitely read through like the structure of the business plan, and then compare that to like my business plan. That'll kind of give you like a quick overview of like all of it. And then you can kind of read through my operations plan section to get a feel for the kinds of things that you should be thinking about, and then go for there. But remember, like the whole point of this week is to really like start to identify aspects of your food truck. So think about, what your core food philosophy is going to be, and then start putting down real details this week. There's a few questions in the week 2 materials that like are things to think about from a homework perspective. We don't actually like check homework, but these are questions that we've tried to identify that may help you think about certain aspects of your business. So just go through those questions and answer them to the best of your abilities.
Yeah, next week too, we're getting into market research and then crowdfunding also. Or sorry, funding in general, but including crowdfunding. So it'll be a good one. And I know, Anthony, you raised part of the money, at least for your food truck, through crowdfunding. So that will be a good one too.
That's always a fun conversation.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I guess thanks for joining everyone this week. Same time, same channel next week. And then also going to be putting this video up, the recording up within the food truck community member area as well. But yeah, definitely see you next week, and make sure to watch the videos and read the information from week 3 in the private members area. And thanks for being here, and see you next week.
See you, everyone.